Check, 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 check. Hello, hello. You're welcome. Yeah, I'm just doing a casual stream. I've been reading people's Substacks on my YouTube channel, which I think it's fine. Keepers of the Inner Flame. This Substack is Laura Matsue Guenther. Guenther. I'm saying Gwen. Gwen. Ah, I'm stepping on my toes. Ah! You ever step on your toes until they hurt and you can't feel them? I think that's funny. I have a fucked up sense of humor. If you know me, you will know I have a really fucked up sense of humor. Wow, this is interesting, dude. Very cool. Recommendations: Bernard Guenther. Coming soon. That's May 22nd. Initiations for the Soul Awakening. April 28th. May 8th. May 14th. May 20th. June 1st. Are these being released on certain days? Let me go back to May real quick. April 28th is a Monday. May 8th is a Thursday. May 14th is a Wednesday. May 20th is a Tuesday. June 1st is a Sunday. June 16th is a Monday. How my dog healed my trauma. That'd be it. When I see, ooh, man, don't even, it's crazy, dude. What is even acceptable to write on Substack? You know what I mean? As long as it's positive, you can write about it. The sacred work of the cycle breaker. That's kind of where I see myself. I see myself as a cycle breaker. Healing ancestral trauma. The rarity of being human in an AI world. When chaos feels like home. Reflections from the spiritual war. For some reason, it doesn't feel good reading this. I feel like, I don't know. Is it acceptable to read Laura's? She is beautiful. And very intelligent, because I have listened to her talk on Cosmic Matrix podcasts. And they are very deep. Let's read her latest one. Is everyone traumatized or no one? I'm just gonna read this one because it's the latest. We'll see how it works. Let me increase the size of the writing. Then I'm going to check that. Yeah, that's good. Now let's check and make sure you can see the writing with my. That's good. With my camera there. Krishnamurti. I don't know. I wouldn't say I had autism, but my sense of humor is fucking. Don't make no sense. No one understands my sense of humor. So I want to premise with, whatever you know about me or my channel. My name is Nicholas Donalds. This is Turtle Island Tetragrammaton. I talk about spirituality in my own style. I talk about you know what I talk about, dude? I talk about Christianity and the occult. I talk about demons. No one's talking about demons, but I do. Is Everyone Traumatized or No One? By Laura Matsue Guenther. I'm going to say Guenther. Subtitle, Trauma Culture. Therapy Speak. And the Healing We Need. So I have to read this in a different way, I'm just getting familiar with Laura's voice. I'm more familiar with Bernard since I read his articles thrice. I read 3 of his articles on this channel. And the only thing I could say is I hope they're not mad at me for sharing their content on my channel. And maybe some copyright legalities, some to handle. But if I get it, I don't see a problem. I've been reading on YouTube for quite a while. This is a long article, dude. But I think I got the energy for it. I'm really interested in who this person is. I think she has like a key for me. I'm going to say Laura has like a key. And like Bernard also has some keys. Subtitle 1. The double narrative of the trauma trend. Therapy Speak has taken... Should I talk in a woman's voice? Therapy Speak has taken over social media. Everyone is either autistic, ADHD, or carrying a cluster of personality disorders. Everyone's ex is a narcissist. Oh, and everything is a trauma response. I don't mean any disrespect. For real, that's what you need to understand. Is even though I may like read to entertain myself in a humorous style, it's just that, okay, I gotta admit, like, spirituality is focusing your life on spirituality is just kind of cringe. But it's almost cute in a way. And that's why when I read, I don't mean any disrespect to the writer. Like, beyond how it sounds, is I actually like to understand what is being spoken. I read the concepts, and they do go into my brain. And then even if, it's okay that, maybe you don't like me to read this way, but it's not because I have disinterest or any maliciousness. It's just because pretty much with the way my mental health is ordered, sometimes to even read through a high concept, these people are cis, these people are straight, these people are, like, to me, that's interesting, right? I never got on that thread, but like being cis and straight and also being interested in spirituality is like a completely different life experience. And this world is heteronormative. It's set up so that cis straight people are you know what I'm talking about? This world is like made for them, by them. And like for some reason queer people and gender non-conforming folks are like on the edges of society, and we're seen as just fucking fringe characters. So when I read these perspectives, I take it all as okay, this is something that my personal style can't really relate to, but at the same time, it's still valuable to me and take my perspective, and I want to hear from them. I want to get to know Laura here. That's why I want to read her article. Is that such a problem? But, if I read in a humorous style, it's just because that's the way I entertain myself, and that's the way that I express myself. But it's not, even if I read like it's sarcastic, I'm not trying to mean any offense. I think I made that clear. Okay. But just to rewind, I'll do it again. So whatever time marker this is here, I'm going to make a bookmark, and that's when the reading will start. Subtopic 1, the double narrative of the trauma trend. Therapy speak has taken over social media. Everyone is either autistic, ADHD, or carrying a cluster of personality disorders. Everyone's ex is a narcissist. Oh, and everything is a trauma response. There are two dominant narratives about this. On one side, conservative thinkers argue that the word, quote, trauma is being overused. People are not in pain. They're just, quote, chronic victims, end quote. Some of their critiques are valid. There is a trend of over-identification with being the victim. But their lack of empathy and understanding for genuine suffering is where they lose me. On the other hand, left-leaning thinkers like, I don't know how to say his name, but I'll try, Gabor Mate, offer a different perspective, much like Krishnamurti's quote, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society," end quote. Mattei argues that trauma is both widespread and misunderstood. That our baseline of quote normal isn't quite the ideal symbol of peak psychological well-being. That people may seem functional. Perhaps they have a family. They own a home. They seem, quote, successful to their peers, but they might still carry unresolved yet normalized symptoms of trauma. As Mattei and others like Lawrence Heller and Pete Walker point out, trauma isn't always about one big event, like being in a war, but can include a culmination of smaller events occurring consistently over a period of time. Like consistent physical or emotional abuse, inconsistent caregiving, what we now know as developmental trauma or complex trauma. I believe that both perspectives hold truth. Trauma is more widespread than we realize, but we must be careful not to turn it into an identity or use it to bypass responsibility. Even Bessel van der Kolk, one of the pioneers of the modern trauma movement, once said, quote, "When trauma becomes your identity, that's a dangerous thing," end quote. The subtopic 2. Psh. The birth of Prozac Nation. I'm an elder millennial. I wasn't a preteen when Prozac Nation hit the shelves. SSRIs were a normal part of my family, and many of my peers were on Ritalin. It was the movement. It was the moment when getting a psychiatric diagnosis became, quote, cool, not, quote, weird. Because I lived through the dawn of this hyper-identified mental illness culture, but also saw the limitations and issues, I feel I can speak to a nuance that gets missed on both sides of the conversation. Yes, psychiatrists were, and still are, over-diagnosing people. I was misdiagnosed myself. But now young people are self-diagnosing via TikTok videos and 60 to 90 second clips from influencers. I've watched people identify with their diagnosis, cling to it, and then use it as an excuse for their behavior. These days it goes even further, where people will list in their Instagram bios various mental illnesses they hold like badges of identity. People are suffering, and I don't believe that most people are, quote, faking it, end quote, for attention. We are a culture starved for meaning, connection, and understanding. The hunger for a diagnosis is often just a hunger to be seen. Boop. Subtopic 3. When therapy replaces a parent's love. When I was around 6, I saw my first therapist, my mother, a psychiatric nurse, thought that the messy, conflict-ridden divorce that she and my father went through would have an impact on me. She was right. It did. So my brother and I were sent to therapy. After our first session, he made a joke that the therapist looked... So my brother and I were sent to a therapy office. After our first session, he made a joke that the therapist looked like, quote, the Incredible Hulk. End quote. I spent the rest of the sessions laughing, cracking jokes, and not taking him seriously. I coped with humor. I was 6. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to have fun with my friends. Let's unpack this. Yes, I needed support. But I needed support from my mother, my father, or any loving, attuned family member. Not a random stranger who apparently looked like the Incredible Hulk. I needed someone who could sit with me, ask me how I felt, and help me move through the difficult experience of having my family broken apart. This is hitting on a lot of different levels because I can really relate to a lot of this. Wow, this is fucking really deep. But my parents were too busy fighting with each other over assets, over custody, and triangulating us, their children, in their divorce. Most of all, I needed my parents to be something they weren't. Emotionally mature. But in the absence of that, I was handed off to a therapist instead. A move that was more uncommon in the 90s than it likely is now. That early rupture set the stage for a pattern that continued for years. Not having family, but instead being handed off to professionals. Subtopic 4. A generation diagnosed. Flash forward. I'm a teen. My friends and I listen to emo music, live in a state of emotional chaos, and have endless addiction to mayhem and cigarettes. It's crazy. Quote, I've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, end quote. A friend tells me proudly as she drags on a cigarette. It gave her an edge, a shield. It was worn like a badge of honor. Quote, see how crazy I am? This article is so deep. Most of my friends were like her. Parents outsourced their care to therapists. There was an absence of love in the presence of privilege and money. I remember around the time I got my first diagnosis. It was around 9/11. I was at a friend's house who was in fact a drug dealer. Watching people fall from the buildings in New York City at the tender age of 15, I was already so miserable that I thought to myself, see, the world is as bad as I feel inside. Watching that tragedy only affirmed my worst views of the world. If she was 15 on 9/11, I was like 7. I was 9, probably. I think I was 9. So she's like 6 years older than me. She's a little older than my brother. Shortly after I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, I was given my first SSRI. Later came a bipolar diagnosis. Damn, this is too real. I relate to this, man. I told the psychiatrist how I could not regulate my emotions. I was either annoyingly manic and couldn't stop talking, unhinged creative, or deeply depressed and hardly able to function. The truth is that I was mimicking what I saw growing up. Intense emotional immaturity. Screaming and yelling were how you got your point across. Hiding out depressed was what you did after. My prefrontal cortex was not fully developed, and my emotional brain was going haywire. I could not regulate my emotions because neither of my parents knew how to regulate theirs. I don't know. This seems like a fucking job. That's like an excuse. I wouldn't. That's crazy what I just read, man. That's really weird. But I'm going to keep going through it. I don't mean to judge her, but that seems like. Maybe there's obviously some logic to that. But when you're a master? That's all I'm trying to say. When you're a master? It ain't like that. 5. Handed pills instead of empathy. At 20, after a series of traumatic sexual experiences, I moved back in with my mother. She booked me to see another psychiatrist. When I entered his office, he didn't even look up. He asked me what the problem was. I told him I was terrified of men, and since men were everywhere, I felt intense anxiety everywhere I went. This is so relatable, dude. Yeah, dude. I didn't tell him why I felt that way, but he didn't ask. He scribbled onto his pad for the whole appointment, which lasted all of 5 minutes. He didn't look at me. I was given an antidepressant, an antipsychotic, a lot of benzodiazepines, and a sleeping pill. Things went from bad to worse after that last visit. I developed a severe drug addiction that ended with an addiction to opiates. Illicit drugs seem to kill the emotional pain in a way that psychiatric drugs couldn't. I wasn't even as interested in getting high. They just made me feel normal. Most of all, they helped me regulate my emotions in a way I didn't know how. Eventually, I gave up hope that any therapist or psychiatrist would offer me any real support. Being handed a prescription and a diagnosis in the absence of empathy or concern left me disillusioned with psychiatry. Damn, she kind of went through what I went through, man. Except it's interesting. I will chime in with my own story. A lot of my psychiatrists were like this, for a long time, but I just got a really great psychiatrist now. He's a really sweet man. I don't know, this is a tangent. I don't mean to talk about my own shit. But I was disillusioned with psychiatry, but I stuck with it. Because, I have bipolar disorder, and I'm medicated for it, but because I feel like I'm disillusioned with psychiatry, but I don't have any other real choices or options. I don't have any alternative health affordable that it's not really available to me. But all I want to say is my psychiatrist, I've had some bad ones and then some really good ones. And people I trust because they have a lot of it. I'm not going to say it's advanced knowledge, but they have medical knowledge. And, I don't know. So let's see what she has to say next. Topic 6. The epidemic of bad therapy. I also saw the first-hand epidemic of, quote, bad therapy, end quote, where unskilled therapists tried to project their worldview onto me in an attempt to help me. Today, this worldview is often leftist and political. Damn, that's crazy. I just got out of a bad therapy, man. It's interesting to see that written this way to reflect on what it is. Because I had bad therapy. I paid this man hundreds of dollars for years. Back then, when I was dealing with drug addiction in response to sexual abuse, the therapist wanted to focus on my, quote, eating disorder, end quote, instead. Because that's what she specialized in, of course. Sure, I wasn't eating that much, but that was because I was addicted to drugs. I didn't feel seen, heard, or understood. She hardly inquired about my inner world, what had been happening in my family, or even what had happened in the years leading up to my arrival in her office. Instead, she forced a perspective onto me. She suggested documenting what I ate. I was given certain cognitive reframes and behavioral changes as a cure. Meanwhile, the psychiatrist handed me the medication I would need to blunt and stop those pesky emotions I couldn't seem to deal with. Damn, this is so fucking pertinent to my life, man. I can relate to like every sentence she's writing. It's almost like she's been through similar shit to me. This is really deep. I'm really glad to read this. Okay. When the labels end. Subtopic 7. Quote, "You're not bipolar," end quote. A therapist said to me plainly over a decade later, after I described to him the experiences above. Quote, "I know," end quote, I answered, being shuttled from therapist to therapist, getting different diagnoses in the absence of stable parents, created a wound I had to heal on my own, outside of the mainstream psychiatric paradigm. I don't want pills. I also didn't think there was anything fundamentally and biologically, quote, wrong with my brain. I just wanted to do what I could to improve myself, heal the emotional wounds of the past, and live and become the person I wanted to be. I wanted to have healthy relationships, but I had no template for this. Most of all, I didn't need a diagnosis. I needed empathy. I needed an explanation for why I was like this, so I could understand that, despite my deep desire to have stable and healthy relationships, I wasn't capable of having them. and instead kept repeating the chaotic relationships that I saw with my parents. Subtopic 8. Trauma is not just the event. Perhaps everyone has experienced wounding events, but not everyone is traumatized by them. My experience showed me that it's not just about the event that happens, but also what happens after. It's about the response to the event from those around you. When I was suffering, I was handed to therapists, psychiatrists, diagnosed, and medicated. This left a deep scar that solidified the event as traumatic because I was alone with the pain. By age 27, I was clean but had intense flashbacks where it felt like I was reliving traumatic events. I was chronically disassociated. And I had violent and recurring nightmares that would make me scream in my sleep. Later, I learned that these are symptoms of complex PTSD. According to some conservatives, this doesn't exist. You only experience trauma if you've been to war or been in a natural disaster. People like me need to get their shit together and stop playing victim. But this mainly after I did get my life together. I found a new job, new friends, found new meaning. I didn't cling to a diagnosis, nor did I believe the lie that my issues were due to biological factors, like a chemical imbalance in my brain. Yet my past still haunted me, despite my best efforts to move on and pretend it didn't happen. Subtopic 9. When labels stop self-inquiry. I think what's happening in the therapy culture and therapy speak is that people are desperate for an explanation for their suffering. The diagnosis becomes validation. It becomes their way of making sense of what they're experiencing, of giving it a name. Since a lot of this is happening online, it also helps them feel seen and understood by a community that shares the same issues. That in itself is very healing for most people. However, there are also problems when people begin to identify with the diagnosis rather than work on the symptoms. They forget that the label is not who you are, and that there are many parts of who you are that cannot be neatly explained by a diagnosis. Therapy speak has also been weaponized by many who don't want to look within. You don't need to look at your patterns in relationships whenever you're around you as a narcissist. You don't need to learn how to regulate your emotions because it's just a trauma response. You just need more safe spaces where you won't ever have to get triggered. These are ideas that I disagree with. Therapy speak risks bypassing the pain and instead intellectualizes it into a concept. The labels people assign can stop people from inquiring further and instead turn people and experiences into a dehumanizing set of psychiatric diagnoses. It's a long sentence. I didn't quite get it. I'm going to rewind because, holy shit. Therapy speak risks bypassing the pain and instead intellectualizes it into a concept. The labels people assign can stop people from inquiring further and instead turn people and experiences into a dehumanizing set of psychiatric diagnoses. Subtopic 10. Seeing the suffering beyond the symptoms. There are probably many people like me who don't actually have a personality disorder they're being labeled with. And in the presence of attuned, empathic relationships, where they are given room to feel and explore their emotions, it's likely the symptoms of the mental illness would go away. However, the answer is not just in critiquing the rise of therapy culture, because anti-therapy culture is not helpful when it bypasses the real suffering that is happening, and especially when it doesn't offer an effective alternative. Therapy culture arose in response to a real need. Young adults wanted understanding for the difficult things that they experienced. If you told me to, quote, get your shit together, end quote, find something meaningful in life, end quote, when I was a drug-addicted teen living in chronically unstable conditions and embroiled in a series of abusive relationships, I probably would have rolled my eyes at you. Rightfully so. Because such a view bypasses the real pain that is underneath the symptoms. We need to acknowledge the real suffering of a generation who is growing up increasingly online and isolated from face-to-face relationships, and invite them towards healing rather than fixating on their psychiatric diagnosis. The label is not meant to be a be-all, end-all to your understanding of yourself. When we replace labels with emotional literacy and accountability, we can tackle some of the symptoms of mental illness. The cure for the pain is in finding safe places to explore your pain, rather than numb it away with psychiatric medication or other drugs. The diagnosis also won't heal, but connection to our bodies, our feelings, and healthy relationships do heal. We don't need more labels, especially when the label serves as a way to end the exploration of the intricacies of our own inner worlds or others. We need spaces where we can speak about our pain without someone trying to fix it with medication or trying to pretend that it's, quote, all in our heads. Subtopic 11. A conservative approach with a liberal understanding. Conservatives emphasize resilience, personal responsibility, and strong families. I agree that taking responsibility for what I could change was integral to my healing. Victim narratives that centered on the ways I had been oppressed only made me feel much worse and kept me stuck in a state of disempowerment, blaming others instead of taking accountability myself. But those with these views tend to gloss over legitimate suffering. They also tend to ignore the fact that, quote, strong families are not the default for many. That many of us come from dysfunctional family systems that were not strong, and unless we examine the ways that impacted us, we are doomed to repeat these same dynamics in our own relationships. They also tend to be focused on, quote, optics. A strong family is a man and a woman with children who go to church. They tend to ignore that image of a, quote, happy family may differ from the reality behind the scenes. That many perfect-seeming families may be privately struggling with addictions, emotional unavailability, and abuse, and yet remain focused on keeping up appearances. Many of us know this because we came from a narcissistic family dynamic ourselves, where children are not loved for who they are, but loved on the basis of how they make the family look. Liberal or more progressive thinkers often advocate for collective, community-rooted healing. There's often an emphasis on systemic roots of trauma, like poverty, racism, patriarchy, and capitalism. They argue that individual suffering cannot be separated from the context of our society, and true healing requires transforming those systems. There is wisdom here. Trauma doesn't happen in a vacuum, and social conditions make a difference. But sometimes these perspectives lean so far into external causes that it becomes political and disempowering, focusing on victim-perpetrator-rescuer narratives, and risk neglecting the vital aspect of personal responsibility, inner work, and changing ourselves instead of trying to change the world. Through my own experience, I arrived at a different conclusion. My deepest healing took place when I embraced the conservative mindset of personal responsibility and yet coupled it with a genuine understanding of trauma, not an overly simplistic one. When I emphasized my own personal responsibility and resilience, while also not bypassing how I and others have been victimized by certain cultural norms, without that experience becoming a new disempowering identity. I started to heal and my relationships finally began to change. If we apply the idea of personal responsibility to trauma, you are not responsible for what other people have done to you, but you are responsible for the way you respond to your pain. I also disagree with the concept of coddling teens and young adults with safe spaces and trigger warnings. Often these environments feel forced, get co-opted by specific political agendas, and quickly turn into places where people are policed for not adopting the dominant worldview rather than being truly heard. Yeah, just that last sentence, I could read it again, but for me, this relates to the fact that why I don't. It's why I don't go to any gatherings. A safe space, you know. I would say church is a safe place for Christians, but they police your opinions there. Um, and they police your opinions on YouTube. They police your opinion. The other one was LGBTQ groups. That's kind of a safe place. It's supposed to be set up that way, but it's just that co-opted. Often these environments feel forced, get co-opted by specific political agendas, and quickly turn into places where people are policed for not adopting the dominant worldview rather than truly being heard. Okay? Okay. Different places you could go. They don't feel right because you feel like everyone's on edge waiting for you to say something wrong. Ideally, parents should prepare us to encounter all sorts of upsetting things we may encounter in the world. We create safe spaces with more emotionally mature, safe people scattered around our communities. People who understand their inner worlds are mature in how they respond to their emotions and can teach us how to regulate ours. I'm trying to read that again, man. I've hardly met anyone who wants to make trauma their identity. Usually, I have found people with symptoms of complex PTSD suffer with symptoms long before they realize what those symptoms mean. Some of the experiences I lived through destroyed my capacity to function like a normal human being for over a decade. But I lived in denial, hoping it would go away if I ignored it. It didn't. I couldn't just, quote, get my shit together, end quote. It only went away when I turned to face the pain. I acknowledged what happened, the impact it had on me, and took responsibility for what I could heal and change. Healing doesn't happen when we deny suffering, nor can it happen if we cling to it. We should see suffering as an essential component of life. No one in life gets out of this unharmed. We will lose the people we love. We will get sick and we will die. It's about facing it, naming it, and holding space for it. In Buddhist terms, we can see that many of us are circling the essential truth. Suffering is a part of life, and that having compassion for suffering is the only way to transform it. And in doing so, we can also help transform the suffering of the world. When we are stronger, more emotionally mature, and self-aware as individuals, we help build resilient families and communities that protect future generations from carrying the same wounds. The generation raised online could be defaulting to identifying with their diagnoses because it fulfills a need not to be seen in their suffering and to belong to a community that is suffering also. It also helps people make sense of their lives and what has happened to them. In many ways, In many ways, it's become the dominant language of millennials, who are by no coincidence astrologically primarily part of Pluto and Scorpio generation. A generation here to bring more awareness to both trauma and the healing of it. The Pluto and Libra generation, preceding them, is here to shine a light on attachment, codependency, and relational issues. We've lived through this and struggled with the impact. And we are here to shine a light by bringing both awareness and healing to these issues. Doing so helps the collective evolution of consciousness. Subtopic 12. Trauma comes to consciousness for healing to begin. Carl Jung says that when an archetype comes to consciousness, it is an opportunity to integrate it. The archetype of trauma, attachment, and mental illness has come up for us to address. Whether you call it trauma or you call it suffering, what breaks the cycle is compassion, extended first to ourselves and outward to the world. In the battle over the rise of trauma culture, the right says we're becoming coddled victims. The left says we're finally seeing the wounds of a sick society. Both missed the point. The trauma is more common than we think, but healing won't come from diagnosis or politicized solutions. It comes from developing a deeper relationship with ourselves, with others. You see how this you see what I mean? You see what I mean though? You see what I mean? Healing will come from a deeper relationship with ourselves, with others, with nature, something that we have lost, creating a spiritual vacuum in which mental illness culture has taken root. We need emotionally literate spaces, not to be coddled, but ones that demonstrate genuine care. Places where we can name our pain, be witnessed, and learn how to hold it without letting it define us. It meaning pain. Hold pain without letting pain define us. We need elders. Mentors. And parents who have walked through the fire and healed themselves. Broken ancestral cycles of pain, and can guide the next generation with humility and hard-won wisdom. We need strong communities rooted in compassion that can hold us to a higher standard of accountability without becoming cults that deny our individuality. Healing begins when we take responsibility for our own inner work and tend to the collective pain around us. Ultimately, it isn't a diagnosis, a political ideology, or a perfect seeming family that will heal us. It's our willingness to be with our brokenness, to face ours and others' suffering with an open heart without pathologizing it. We don't need more labels if the label is a way to end the conversation. We need the presence and attunement to understand ourselves better. Because unprocessed pain doesn't just disappear, it gets passed on for generations until one of us stops and does something different. Wow. That was a really good article. I was fucking. I can relate to this because I got bipolar disorder. My fucking therapist tells me to make a food log. 11 comments. Too tired to read all this tonight, says Paula Umel. But you've got my attention. Excellent beginning, and I'll be back after sleep. Jess Heading writes this. I couldn't love this more. I see again and again, both in my practice and for myself, that at first labels are relief, a sense of being seen and validated. Then at some point, down the line, they become a cage. Every single label or diagnosis, and I've had a lot, I've ever had has followed this progression. And I drop them like they're hot once they start to feel disempowering. I also find there's a prevailing view that most mental health issues will be a lifelong battle. That hasn't been the case for me once I understood the root causes. I love that you're advocating a conservative approach with liberal understanding, and that feels spot on to me. Great comment, Jess. Marie says, this is an awesome read. Just leave it there. Rebecca says, whoa, this is such a wonderful article with more truth about healing than I've heard in all the years of therapy. Thank you. Jana says this. The uncanny overlap of your story and mine is absolutely wild. Right. I agree wholeheartedly with everything you shared. We need to take personal responsibility for how we relate to our traumas. We need to work to connect somatically to ourselves. And we need to create new systems of communication and connection to support those personal developments. I love the light you're shining. Great comment. Robe7 says, no article ever treated this matter in such a thorough, omni-comprehensive way. I live in Italy, am Italian, so my perspective can vary a bit, but I can definitely relate on what I have seen coming in the last maybe 20 years and hit our family because of our third son's diagnosis. At first dyspraxia, then autism. I opposed to medical treatment, but not to diagnosis, because it seemed too much to me. We needed help. Now he is an adolescent, and I can see what is happening around us and the increasing number of people going to therapy or having any kind of certification at school. Also, my older son of 3 had private... I think he writes psychotherapy for some year after me and my husband split. Your approach has been mine too, though I would not have been able to articulate it as you did. Thanks so much, and please go on writing on Substack. Jason says, a lot of what you expressed connected strongly. I didn't read everything because I can feel overwhelmed by words. But from what I did read, I realized many of your reflections are my reflections as well, having a lack of adequate empathy, love, and bloodline support as I grew up, being taken to psychological professionals that were actually unprofessionals, over time being prescribed many, many drugs that likely have damaged my health, and even the perspectives on people wearing diagnoses as a badge of honor, which can be problematic. But again, there's so much that you expressed that connected with me, heart, brain, energy, core, and personal perspective. Oh, there's 16 comments here. Joanna says this. It amazes me how self-aware you are while at the same time objective to the society and culture at large. You understand political dynamics as well as psychological and spiritual ones. Very impressive. I'm older now and recovered from a rocky start in life with alcohol and drugs. Alcohol addiction dominated my life for many years following, and I suffered many bad situations. I consider myself extremely lucky that I never found the need to see a shrink or go on meds. I self-medicated. Therapy came later. After rehabs, I had the very good fortune of finding a supportive team of patient and insightful professionals who literally saved my life. I have to put a good word in for my osteopathic doctors whose cranial treatments addressed and healed the trauma that was embedded in my body. That took many years. Thank you so much for the work you do helping others. Cosmic Milkshake says this. Very well said. Thank you. I'm a 1966er, so Pluto and Virgo generation. I've been living in Mexico for 20 years, so I have been outside of our culture for quite some time. I remember the first time I met someone who said, quote, I have ADHD. It was maybe 12 years ago. I was in an airport lineup in Dallas, and I had my cat with me, so this young guy in his early 20s sparked up a conversation. And almost immediately he offered, quote, I have ADHD, end quote. To me, I was surprised and skeptical. I have a bunch of Scorpio planets. I looked surprised when he said it and said, quote, what? Oh! What is ADHD exactly? How do you know you, quote, have this, end quote? He said, quote, well, it's when you can only focus on what you're interested in, end quote. I was like, quote, really? Because I get that. Why would you want to focus on something you're not interested in? I don't think that's a disease. Maybe you don't put a label to yourself. And I hope you're not taking drugs because of this label. We're all so differently from each other, end quote. He seemed genuinely happy to have had our little conversation, and he said he was going to look at it differently. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what an idiot, man. Air sign? Air Mercury? Strong Uranus? What an idiot. And antidepressants came late to my generation, too. I remember when they first came out thinking Soma and ecstasy was Soma for the partying crowd. I mean, if you're suicidal, by all means, take something for a couple of months until you're out of the woods. But if you're taking an antidepressant because you're depressed for months and years, seems so obvious that you should maybe look at the root of your cause, at the root of your depression, instead of taking a pharmaceutical to live a fake life. Now I just sound like a cold heart person, I know. Just feeling very thankful that I'm not a young person in today's world, with everyone, including themselves, hardcore addicts to their devices. I mean, we've got a world full of addicts now. It's pretty crazy. I can't imagine being a parent trying to navigate all that's been foisted on their children either. Sigh. Agata says, I was thinking about it yesterday. If we're all traumatized, is anyone really normal? Maybe not. Ruby says, truth. The key is learning how to acknowledge the label without being it. And delete TikTok. Paulette says, thank you, Laura. Timing is everything. Divine timing. I needed to be reminded what I'm here to do. Liza says, one of the things we really need in order for more people to find effective help and support for their suffering is the truth to come out about the ineffectiveness of the psychiatry and medication model of care. I've seen so many times where someone is really struggling in a very dark place and they sincerely did not have the tools or energy to dig themselves out. The loved ones don't know how to handle it and believe that psychiatry professionals will take care of it. The path, while well-intentioned by many, is heartbreaking for those who see through it. Krista says this. This is so beautifully said and wholeheartedly agree with everything you wrote. I recorded a podcast today where I expressed many similar thoughts. I was born in 1983, and I am absolutely here to help guide others through suffering and offer them a soft place to land. May we be the teachers and mentors we longed to have in our darkest hours. James says this. This was spot on, so well said and articulated. I relate with everything you said in this post. Thank you, Laura. I also shared this with my Substack email list. Ileana. The overuse, misuse, and inverted use of labels and accusations like narcissist disgust and sicken me. I am a scapegoat child survivor of an actual narcissist. Personality disorder. I thought childhood was trying to survive someone that wanted to kill your soul. They also kill your voice. Now they have taken the only language I hear to talk about my experience, expressing the inexpressible being healing in itself. Now it's met with rolled eyes and disgust. I've been part of the culture wars and loathe victimhood manipulation, usually because the victims are, if not narcissists, then at least have narcissistic traits and use the victim social justice to bully others. Definitions matter. Truth matters. self-awareness matters. Quote, legitimate suffering, end quote, matters. Okay, say goodbye, Bombay. We're all done reading. Well, it's been really interesting. Again, I apologize if you don't like the way I read, but that's what I have to do to keep myself focused. Very good article. I'm really happy about it. Yeah, I'm glad I took this on. It was not an easy one, but I could relate to a lot of it. And I think she's really cool. You know, I don't expect I'll ever meet her. Keepers of the Inner Flame. That's what this blog is called. Keepers of the Inner Flame. So definitely, I'll share the Substack article below. Please support Laura Matsue Guenther. Notes? Any notes about this? She's writing all kinds of notes, man. We don't need more influencers. We need more women who live in the woods brewing potions and reading tea leaves that foretell of forgotten prophecies. That's crazy, though. That's crazy, though. She been really posting, man. She be really posting. She's sharing the Bernard shit. So yeah, I mean, check my catalog. I've been doing some videos. Yeah, thanks for hanging out with me. Turtle Island Tetragrammaton. I'm Nicholas. Hope you have a great night. See you guys later. Again, please support Laura's Substack if you can. And, you know, she's got a lot of articles on there, so there's more to read from that author. And then also Bernard posts, and she shares Bernard's, and Bernard shares Laura's. So it's cool. Very a family affair on Substack, and I love to see it. And very inspired by this writing, for sure. Yeah, brilliant, very powerful. So thanks a lot. I can relate because, you know, mental health is a serious topic for me, and obviously she touched on it in the article, but yeah, very important to us, and yeah, bringing this shit to light. So in service, you know, in service, this is Turtle Island Tetragrammaton, and I hope you have a blessed night, and I'll see you next time. So catch you later. Bye.